You ever look at a stage in any Sonic game and wonder, whoa, how did that happen? The Sonic the Hedgehog universe is a bizarre and unexplained one. Something that I've been questioning ever since I really looked at each zone as not just something to help Sonic build momentum, but as how can they exist at all? We're gonna try to understand it all today. So don't die when some giant monster floods your entire city, because we're going to dive into the wacky world building of Sonic today. In order to even begin to explain this weird world, we're gonna have to go down the line and break down the level design of each Sonic game. I'm not gonna talk about every single game and every stage, just a few notable examples, ones I find particularly peculiar. We should of course start with... You never really think about it consciously while zooming through this lush forest, island, hill, but aside from the badneck spikes and springs, this hill area is entirely naturally formed. Think about it. In all the classic games, what are these places inhabited by? Tiny animals that have no way of, what? Building these landscapes to have loop-de-loops for fast hedgehogs to zoom through? In these games, you don't have all too many characters to really populate these lands with people, so you're meant to believe that these floating platforms are just the work of nature. This was all done intently by the level designers to make that perfect first impression. They put in so much work to make sure everything about the stage was right, both for the sake of complementing the gameplay, of course, and the aesthetic. It has a real kinetic feel to it that these first 2D platformers nailed. That's what made it work. How it's unethical yet logical, as my friend Zebra Boy put it. Let's take a more perplexing example of the landscapes in the classics, shall we? Sonic CD primarily takes place on Little Planet. In other words, an entirely separate planet compared to the same one we were just at. Well, you could give it more leeway in that sense for having otherworldly environments, cause it literally is another planet. That being said, it still isn't too different from the environments that take place in the other games, which are all presumably on the same planet. Take a shot every time I say planet or world or environment, goddamn. For example, Palm Tree Panic is essentially a remixed version of Green Hill Zone. If it seemed impossible for Green Hill to exist in our world, Palm Tree Panic is no different. The different tunnels, pathways, its much larger loops all feel randomly generated in a way. There's a reason this game's level design in particular is considered the strangest out of all the classics, from a gameplay standpoint and a lore standpoint. This is when I remind you yet again, this is not man-made.
Hey, really quick, I go on this whole tangent that's like completely wrong. So to save myself the embarrassment, I'm just gonna cut this entire part out. Sorry.
So it implies that no one lives here. These are all just landscapes with no rhyme or reason, just for no one to exist in them, except for Sonic. In general, this is basically all the same way for each classic game, not counting the robotic-themed stages that obviously look like that because Eggman built them that way. We've already seen these places displaying on their own their nonsensical yet natural terrains. It's not too unbelievable for forests, islands, labyrinths, and ruins to form on their own as these maze-like playgrounds. Obviously not on the same level as these cartoon-inspired games, but nature has tended to build itself in odd ways before. Whether it's because of the interference of us humans or not, nature isn't always logical. But city-like structures or spaces that are in general for us to live in, they are built by us, to be practical for everyday citizens to walk through. It'd be crazy if you have to go through an entire loop or jump on floating platforms over a bottomless pit, just so you can make it over to the grocery store for some eggs. Sonic had a rough transition into... I don't even want to finish that sentence. We're talking about Sonic Adventure now. In my opinion, Adventure 1 specifically is the smoothest transition in the change of environments from the classic games, as it has both natural terrains and cityscapes to accommodate the existence of other humans aside from Eggman populating this world. With that being said, holy shit, how do any of these humans live in this fucking city? We're talking about Hubworlds now, but don't worry, we'll get back to levels soon. The Hubworlds are actually the most normal we've seen of the planet so far. As normal as having floating TV screens scattered around the city, or a giant pinball machine that leads to the sewers, or, oh, a floating island. But still, the general structure of Cityscape... Oh god, I just said Cityscape. We're not there yet. The general structure of Station Square is just like a regular area of the city, with pretty insane attractions that we'll get to soon. And the Mystic Ruins are also like a regular jungle, except they also lead to insane levels we'll get to. I could go in detail about everything, but I think it's easy to understand what I'm trying to get at here. At least Hubworlds look like areas you can imagine people being able to walk around in. It almost feels too real despite the low poly graphics and low res JPEGs. They just add on to the charming look from this game, which makes it even stranger when they transition to... Emerald Coast tricks you into thinking it's normal to some extent at first. What I mean is, sure, there's robots and those screens I mentioned scattered around, but it's just a peaceful beach with a dock and a loop. Oh yeah, things change when you go through that. It's really fascinating how all this just transitions from normal to, well, unwalkable design that's naturally formed. Or how about we talk about a stage that is actually man-made? Yeah, Emerald Coast looks like a walk through the sand compared to this. I suppose you could still give it some leeway because not all parts of nature are meant to be walked through by humans. But then you have this shit. This giant highway up these very tall buildings, the road that twists and turns up and down all around. Like, this is clearly unsafe. Why would anyone drive around here?
Dude, those animals are so fucking funny, they make me want to merge without looking! Mad at gas!
The latter of this stage is like an inverse of Emerald Coast, where this time, after running down this building, you're taken to a very small and normal part of the city, where, unlike the crazy, life-threatening, expanding height of the highway, this section is pretty enclosed, almost claustrophobic. I could talk about the stages and games we see later, but really I'd just be repeating myself. Natural or city-like structures being transformed into these bizarre tracks for Sonic to traverse through. The most to deviate from this aesthetic would be Sonic 06 and Frontiers, which lean towards much more realistic feels, and Colors in Lost World, which are much more cartoony. But like CD, they take place on different planets. We still have something particularly interested and mind-boggling to talk about. Something that's basically plagued the mind and confusion for most people. Humans are the biggest anomalies in the Sonic universe. There are games where they're present, where they're nowhere to be found, except for Eggman, of course. Eggman is a special case, because he's a staple of the franchise. You'll never catch anyone asking Sega to remove him from future games, because humans just don't belong there. I'd hope there isn't, at least. Obviously, since he's been here from the start, that always suggested that humans might exist. At the same time, it's not like Eggman's just a regular old person. He has an IQ of 300, for God's sake. So that still begs the question, how do humans live here? They've appeared in both of the adventure games, the first one as background characters and the second as more prominent in the story. Same case in Shadow the Hedgehog, 06, and Unleashed. We're not talking about their relevance in the story, though. We're talking about them existing at the same time and near these areas. Especially because for city structures, they're responsible for building them this way. City Escape is a very obvious homage to San Francisco. It's known already that Sonic Team traveled around to take inspiration from the environments from real-world locations. But even if you take away the snowboarding hedgehog toppling over cars and the giant fucking truck destroying everything to catch him, the section of a city is a life hazard. So how? How do these normal people live in places like these? How could they possibly traverse around them? This is where we get to the theory part of the video. I have two ideas on how humans can exist in this world. 1. You know those power-up items that just happen to be lying around random areas, or the fact that in 06 there's a guy literally selling them? They could very well be fit for humans to use as well. Even though in 06 you only see the free hedgehogs use them, the old man selling them clearly intends to distribute it not just to anthropomorphic animals. He had Sonic test them in the first place because of it. May not be the most interesting answer, but it is the most logical solution. And 2. These are normal humans. I do have explanations to this, so bear with me. I brought up earlier how Eggman himself isn't so normal with his freakishly high IQ. And another thing, I know it shouldn't be looking too deep into this, but there are a few cases where Eggman's been able to outrun Sonic on foot before. So, this is the biggest reach out of all of them, but look at this commercial. Now obviously I shouldn't look for lore in something like an ad, but who's to say these aren't the same humans in Station Square? Trust me, bro. Okay, that aside, there still seems to be a certain power these humans hold that may not be on the same level as the borderline furry cast, but still something that separates them from actual normal people that we know. Like Maria.
Maria!
Maria literally got shot. You can try to erase the past as much as you want, Sega, but it's not gonna work. Yet she managed to stay alive long enough to put Shadow in that escape pod and tell him her final wish. So this implies they have more resilience than us. Going back to 06, Elise. I know she's a whole other can of worms, but everyone shut up real quick. Now it might have just been a misdirection, but during the first half of the game, they seem to have hinted towards some kind of power Elise has. They might have just meant being able to seal the flames of disaster in her or being able to revive Sonic. But wait, go back, they sealed a little god in this human child? And the way to release it is through either killing her or making her cry? So she forced herself to never cry for years until Mephiles did that. How? Literally how? That's like impossible. She never scraped her knee and teared up a little. And of course, the most important character of all, Sonic Man. He honestly just speaks for himself. He raised Sonic. Okay, that should wrap it up for humans. Or humans. Whatever you want to call them. Speaking of. Now, Chomix already made a really great video on this that I recommend you check out if you want a more in-depth analysis on this topic. But to summarize, a lot of fans usually call this planet Mobius, and while that is the case with the original Sonic Bible and some continuities like Sad AM and the Archie comics, this would turn out to not be the truth for the games. The word Mobius is never used, so what else could it be? Well, they did refer to the planet as Earth a couple times, but that's still not right, because anytime they'd use the word, there's no capitalization with the E, implying that it's not the name of the planet they're talking about, but more like what it's made of. So what the hell is this place? They flat out dodged the idea of properly naming the planet multiple times. Yeah, they call it Sonic's World, but like, come on, that's not the actual canon name. Not to mention the zone names. Some do make sense as actual names for these areas like Green Hill, Emerald Hill, Sky Sanctuary, Westopolis, or Sunset Heights. But then you have Hydro City, City Escape, Wave Ocean, Crisis City. They could have just been what the levels were called, but in Generations you have lines like, "This must be the chemical plant." So, who even names them? So now that we have all of this sitting in our minds, scattered around, if we tie them all together, what could we conclude? What is this world? I don't know. I actually don't have an explanation for any of this, but what I do know is understanding how these places make me feel whenever I see them, running around through any of these cast perspectives. It's like a dream. It takes all these elements from real life that we're familiar with, but then removes all logic from it. They're not too mystical that it would feel impossible for them to exist in our world, but still just having this inherent magic about it. Like liminal spaces, they focus on these actual locations that exist, but give them a whole new meaning. It makes them bizarre, but freeing in a way. Remember what I kept saying about them being logical yet defying reality? That's it. Dreams are all different for everyone, but they also tend to have recurring things from our lives, just with their own twists. They can be frightening, beautiful, dangerous, safe. It all depends on how they make you feel. That is the best explanation I really have of Sonic's World, and there may not even be anything else. That is unless Sega has the answers I've been searching for all along, just locked in a safe for us to never know the dark truth. If that's the case, I could sleep easy anyway. I know that the simplest and most obvious conclusion should be that it doesn't matter. They look like that literally just for the sake of gameplay. It's not that deep. But look, that's boring. I just find it being fun and interesting to find some meaning behind the level design and lore of the series. Either way, thank you for listening to me yap again. Press a button, just any button, I don't care. Bye! Buzz? What are you, a bee? Fucking get it together, man.
I fucking love